Stay here and clean the house, Mom, because the beach vacation is just for us, and the kids need space. I am Connie. I am 71 years old, and I spent my entire life behind the lens of a camera as a studio photographer, capturing the flawless smiles of other people's families while holding my own together with tooth and nail. What my son forgot this morning as he packed my life savings into his suitcase and discarded me like an old piece of furniture is that the one who develops the photograph always holds the original negative in their hands. The dawn had started like any other day in my house, or at least in the house that had once been solely mine. The kitchen clock barely read 5:30 a.m. when my bare feet touched the cold tiles. At that hour, silence is usually a gift, a brief pause before the hurricane of daily living wipes away the peace. But today wasn't just any day. Today was the day of the big family trip. I had spent weeks preparing everything, anticipating the heat of the sun on my tired joints, imagining the ocean breeze I hadn't felt in over a decade. I tied my apron around my waist, the same faded floral linen apron that has accompanied me for years. My hands marked by the dark-room chemical stains of my youth, and the wrinkles of time began their automatic dance. I pulled out the flour, the eggs, the milk, and the butter. My grandkids, Hudson, who is 7, and Sophie, who is 5, adored my pancakes, especially on holidays or travel days. It was a tradition I had established myself, and as I whisked the batter in the glass bowl, the rhythmic sound of metal against crystal served as my anchor. I was the grandmother who cared. That was my identity, my armor, and until that moment, my greatest pride. Since Ray, my ex-husband, packed his things 15 years ago and chased after a younger illusion, my world had shrunk and simultaneously concentrated entirely on my son, Fletcher. The divorce didn't destroy me, but it hardened me in certain areas and softened me in others. I promised myself that my son would never lack the warmth of a home, that his father's absence would be compensated by double the presence from me. I worked double shifts at the photo studio shooting weddings, baptisms, communions, always on my feet, always smiling behind the viewfinder to pay for Fletcher's college tuition, to ensure that this big, high-ceilinged house remained our sanctuary. And that sanctuary opened its doors wide 5 years ago when Fletcher and his wife, Lauren, lost their apartment due to a bad financial decision. They arrived with suitcases, cardboard boxes, and long faces, begging for asylum just for a few months until they could get back on their feet. Months turned into years. The boxes were unpacked, the guest room morphed into the kids' room, and my living room became the sovereign territory of plastic toys and discarded shoes. I didn't complain. On the contrary, my mother's heart saw the opportunity to have my blood close by. I took over the grocery shopping because kids are terribly expensive. I started paying the water and power bills because Lauren couldn't find the job she deserved. Little by little, my pension and my life savings merged into what Fletcher called the family fund. The smell of vanilla and melted butter began to fill the kitchen. I poured the first ladle of batter into the hot cast iron. The sizzle of the liquid hitting the metal snapped me back to the present. Upstairs on the second floor, I could hear rushed footsteps, the dull rumble of suitcase wheels dragging across the hardwood floors I had polished myself just last weekend. I could hear Lauren's high-pitched voice complaining that something didn't fit in her designer bag, a bag that curiously appeared in the house right after I gave them money for Hudson's school supplies. I stacked the golden pancakes on a large ceramic plate, covering them with a clean cloth to keep them warm. I squeezed fresh oranges, feeling the citric acid sting the tiny cuts on my fingers, the result of hours spent sewing the school play costumes that Lauren always forgot to order on time. I was the invisible safety net of this family, the one who cooked breakfast, the one who washed the clothes, the one who bankrolled their whims camouflaged as necessities. The idea for the trip had surfaced 2 months ago. Fletcher came home buzzing with excitement, holding up his smartphone to show me pictures of a 5-star coastal resort. "Mom, we need a break. It's been a rough few years. The kids deserve to see the ocean," he told me, flashing that smile he knew would melt my defenses. He asked me to fund the adventure. "You have your studio savings, right, Mom? I manage the banking app. I'll take care of all the bookings so you get a better deal. You just need to authorize the transfer to the central account." And I, blinded by love and the dream of walking on the sand with my grandkids, went to the bank, signed the paperwork, and moved a considerable sum into that account he managed from his phone, even though legally I was still the primary account holder. For weeks, I got ready. I went to the mall and bought a modest swimsuit, a wide-brimmed sun hat, and a comfortable pair of sandals. I packed my things in a humble green canvas duffel bag that I tucked discreetly into the corner of my bedroom, ready to stay out of the way, ready to be the grandma who watches the kids in the pool while the parents relax. The footsteps approached the stairs. The kids ran into the kitchen, followed by Fletcher, who was hauling 2 massive suitcases, sweating and frowning. "Pancakes!" Hudson yelled, climbing onto the chair and grabbing one with dirty hands before I could even offer him a fork. "Slow down, sweetie, they're hot," I said softly, pouring him a glass of juice. Fletcher dropped the suitcases in the hallway with a heavy thud that rattled the door frames. He was wearing a white linen shirt I had ironed the night before, making sure the collars were crisp and entirely wrinkle-free. Lauren appeared right behind him, flawlessly made up, at 6 a.m., scrolling through her phone without so much as a good morning. She sat at the table, pushed the plate of pancakes away with a gesture of pure disdain, and sighed. "Fletcher, are you sure you put my creams in the checked bag? I don't want TSA confiscating them," she said, completely ignoring my presence. "Yeah, babe, it's all in there," he replied hurriedly, pouring himself coffee and spilling a few dark drops onto the clean tablecloth. I stepped up to the table, wiping my hands on my apron. I felt a flutter of anticipation in my stomach. "Well, I have my green bag ready upstairs," I mentioned with a smile, trying to blend into the frantic morning energy. "Do you want me to bring it down now so we can load it into the trunk? I know the cab to the airport gets here in 20 minutes. The silence that followed my words was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Hudson stopped chewing. Sophie looked at me with her big brown eyes. Lauren looked up from her phone for the first time all morning. She shot a rapid glance at Fletcher, then looked back down, letting out a small, sharp smirk, almost imperceptible, but lethal. Fletcher set his coffee mug on the table. He didn't meet my eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tell he had carried since childhood, whenever he was about to lie or do something he knew he should be ashamed of. "Mom," he started, his voice dragging in that patronizing tone people use when speaking to someone who doesn't understand the language. "There's been a change of plans." My smile froze, but it didn't vanish immediately. The maternal instinct, that stubborn force that always seeks to justify a child, scrambled for a logical explanation. "A change of plans. Did they delay the flight? That's fine. I can keep the pancakes warm a bit longer." "No, the flight leaves at the same time," Fletcher finally said, looking up. His eyes were cold, calculating, entirely stripped of any trace of the tenderness I had poured into him his entire life. "The change is about the tickets and the hotel." I took a step back, pressing my spine against the cool metal of the refrigerator. My breathing grew a little shallower. "I don't understand, son." Fletcher let out a heavy sigh of impatience, acting as if I were a bureaucratic nuisance ruining his perfect morning. "Look, the rooms at that resort are really expensive, and the flights, well, with peak season, prices skyrocketed. I had to adjust the budget. And frankly, Mom, at your age, a trip like this is just too exhausting. The sun, the sand, walking around all day. You're going to get tired and you'll just slow us down." The words hovered in the kitchen air, mixing with the sweet smell of breakfast. I felt a dull blow to the center of my chest, like the air had been violently knocked out of my lungs by an invisible fist. "But I paid for that trip, Fletcher." My voice came out low, perfectly level. There was no anger, yet only a vast, profound confusion. "The money I transferred was for a family vacation." Lauren let out a short, dry, humorless laugh. "Oh, please, Connie," my daughter-in-law said, using my first name with that same condescension I had tolerated for years. "It's family money, and right now the family is Fletcher, the kids, and me. You already had your time to travel when you were young. We need this break. Besides, someone has to stay behind and watch the house." I looked at Fletcher, waiting for him to correct her. waiting for the little boy whose scraped knees I used to bandage, the young man whose college tuition I paid by developing photos deep into the night, the man I opened my doors to when he had nowhere else to go, to step up and defend his mother. But Fletcher just shrugged, nodding slightly at his wife's words. "Lauren's right, Mom. Stay here and clean the house, because the beach vacation is just for us, and the kids need space. Use these days to rest. Oh, and don't forget trash pickup is tomorrow, and the plants in the backyard need watering every afternoon." There was no screaming from me, no tears sliding down my wrinkled cheeks. In that precise instant, as I looked at my son's relaxed jaw and my daughter-in-law's triumphant glare, something inside me clicked off. And something else, something much older and infinitely colder, sparked to life. I had always been a woman of deep affections. I had loved my family with a devotion that bordered on absolute martyrdom. I had forgiven slights, ignored minor disrespects, served hot meals, and washed someone else's laundry in total silence, believing that unconditional love would eventually breed gratitude. But in that second, I realized my fatal error. Unconditional love doesn't breed gratitude in selfish hearts. It breeds entitlement. It creates the illusion that the giver has no boundaries, no self-worth, and most dangerously of all, no power. My personality, forged in patience and constant caregiving, didn't devolve into hysterics. Like the good photographer I always was, I simply shifted the focus. I adjusted the lens. I saw the scene with clinical clarity, completely stripped of the hazy filter of blind motherhood. I stepped away from the refrigerator. My movements were slow, measured. I walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, and washed my hands, scrubbing away every last trace of flour and butter. I shut off the water, took a cotton towel, and dried my fingers, one by one, taking my time, forcing them to watch my silence. "I understand," I finally said. My voice sounded so terrifyingly calm that even Fletcher looked rattled for a second. They expected drama. They expected me to cry, to beg, to make them feel a fleeting ping of guilt they could conveniently forget the second they boarded the plane. I didn't give them that pleasure. "You understand?" Fletcher asked, raising an eyebrow, visibly relieved he didn't have to deal with an emotional scene. "That's great, Mom. I knew you'd be reasonable. It's for the best." Outside, the blast of a taxi horn shattered the tension in the kitchen. Lauren jumped up, brushing non-existent crumbs off her flawless skirt. "That's our ride. Kids, grab your backpacks, we're leaving." The chaos rebooted. The kids bolted for the front door. Fletcher grabbed the heavy suitcases, wrestling a bit with the weight. I watched him walk down the hallway, dragging the wheels over the wood I cared for. I saw him stop at the entrance. "Mom," he called out, without looking back, his voice rushed, his mind already on the beach. "I need to take the Platinum credit card, the one in your name. I linked it to the app, but the hotel sometimes asks for the physical plastic for the security deposit. You know how strict those luxury places are." I walked slowly down the hall, went to the entryway table, opened the drawer where I kept my documents, and pulled out the credit card. The very card backed by the little capital I had left, and the fully paid-off mortgage of this exact house. I pinched the plastic between my fingers for a second. I could have said no. I could have thrown a massive fit right there at the door, but my strategic mind, the same mind that spent decades calculating the exact lighting to make a portrait flawless, was already working 10 steps ahead of them. I handed him the card. "Take it," I said, looking him dead in the eyes. This time he was the one who looked away first. "Thanks, Mom. We'll call you when we get there, if we have good signal on the beach. Don't wear yourself out cleaning." Lauren breezed past me, leaving a wake of expensive perfume without saying goodbye. The kids yelled a quick goodbye from the back seat of the cab. Fletcher climbed into the passenger side and shut the door. I stood on the threshold of my house, feeling the cool morning air hit my face. I watched the vehicle pull away, kicking up a small cloud of dust on the quiet street, until it turned the corner and vanished from sight. I didn't raise my hand to wave. I simply watched like a sentinel observing the enemy willingly abandon the fortress. I turned around and went back inside. The house was swallowed by a tomb-like silence, a brutal contrast to the noise of the last 5 years. But it wasn't a silence of peace. It was the silence of contempt. I walked slowly through the living room. They had left 3 half-drunk mugs of coffee on my oak coffee table, leaving circular moisture rings on the wood. In the hallway, a pair of Hudson's muddy shoes were discarded dead center in the walkway. I reached the kitchen. The plate of pancakes was still there, the spilled juice on the tablecloth, the dirty skillet on the stove, the mess they had ordered me to clean, the physical testament to my status as a maid in my own home. I ran my fingertips along the edge of the table. That sadness, the one that had tried to suffocate me in front of the refrigerator, evaporated entirely, leaving in its wake a cold, razor-sharp, and absolutely relentless clarity. They had stolen my trip, insulted me to my face, and weaponized my love as a weakness. But Fletcher had made a monumental miscalculation. He grew up watching me serve, watching me cook, watching me yield, and he mistook my service for stupidity. He thought that just because he tapped a modern app on his phone, he controlled the money. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the master bank account the original contract, and the fund's security clauses were legally bound to my signature, my fingerprints, and my physical presence at the bank. He only had an extension, a mirage of power I had granted him out of convenience and affection, a permission that could be revoked with the exact same ease as flipping a light switch. I didn't pick up the mugs. I didn't wipe the tablecloth. I didn't wash the skillet. I walked out of the kitchen and headed straight for the solid wood front door. I looked out at the empty street one last time. The sun was just starting to heat the asphalt. Their vacation was just beginning. I pushed the heavy door shut, listening to the friction of the hinges. I gripped the brass knob firmly. The affection hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed its locks. I slammed the door, and the metallic clack of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed down the empty hallway, marking the exact definitive end of my submission. I was home alone, and I had exactly 12 hours before they walked up to the reception desk of that 5-star resort. 12 hours to develop the true photograph of this family. The metallic echo of the deadbolt bounced off the hallway walls and slowly faded, leaving absolute stillness in its wake. I stood before the solid wood door for a couple of minutes, my hand still resting on the cold brass knob. I didn't feel the tremors that usually follow massive letdowns. There was no lump in my throat, none of that suffocating chest pressure I had experienced so many times in the past when my family failed me. What I felt was a crushing lucidity, a mental sharpness you only achieve when you stop trying to focus a blurry image and instead change the lens entirely. I turned around and started walking through my own house. The hardwood floors creaked softly beneath my feet, a familiar sound that for 5 years had been masked by screaming kids, Lauren's constant complaining, and my son's heavy footsteps. I walked through the living room. Hudson's plastic toys were scattered like landmines across the Persian rug I bought with my first major photography contract. The sofa cushions were thrown on the floor. The 3 half-empty coffee mugs were still on the center table, and a thick, dark drop was slowly sliding down the white porcelain, about to stain the oak wood. Yesterday, that sight would have triggered a sigh of resignation before I went to fetch a damp rag. Today, it was simply evidence. It was a crime scene I was no longer willing to clean. I walked down the hall to the back of the house, bypassing the kitchen and the plate of cold pancakes. I stopped in front of a dark wooden door I rarely opened these days. It was my old darkroom, the sanctuary where I spent the late nights of my youth, turning celluloid strips into indelible memories for other families. I pushed the door open. The smell of old chemicals fixer and photo paper still hung in the stagnant air, a time capsule welcoming me back. I flipped on the red safety light, the only light the main bulb allowed, and the room was bathed in a scarlet glow that turned shadows into solid shapes. I walked straight to the old gray metal filing cabinet resting beneath the powered-down enlarger. I crouched, feeling the slight pop in my knees, and pulled out a small brass key I always kept hidden in the inner pocket of my apron. I unlocked the bottom drawer. There were no negatives in there, No strangers' wedding albums. There were thick manila folders organized with an alphabetical and chronological precision that Lauren, with all her disdain for my supposed modern ignorance, could never comprehend. I pulled out the folder labeled with the year my life first shattered. I sat on the wooden stool and opened it on the workbench. The first document was a bank contract with yellowing edges. Seeing that signature, my own signature, written in the firmer, younger strokes of my past dragged me 15 years backward with the force of a camera shutter firing in the dark. It was the morning after Ray walked out. I was 56, heartbroken, staring at a stack of debt collection notices on the dining table. Ray had drained our joint account before boarding a plane with his new illusion. I remember sitting in that very kitchen chair, crying silently so as not to wake Fletcher, who was 24 at the time and had just finished college. When my son finally came down for breakfast, he saw my swollen eyes and the bank papers. I explained, my voice cracking, that his father had left us with nothing, that we'd have to mortgage the house, that I'd have to work double shifts. I expected a hug. I expected my son, now a grown man, to tell me we would get through it together. Instead, Fletcher checked his watch, grabbed a piece of toast, and said, "Mom, don't drag me into your drama. I have a job interview and I'm running late. Figure it out. You always know what to do." That afternoon 15 years ago, I dried my tears. I went to the main bank branch downtown and opened a master account exclusively in my name. I deposited the first payment from a string of 3 weddings I was shooting that month. I swore to the manager on duty, a young guy in a sharp suit, that no one but me would ever have power over those funds. I signed rigid security clauses, the kind that require physical presence and a fingerprint for any substantial modification. When Fletcher came home weeks later asking for money for a down payment on a car, I told him no. He was furious, but I stood my ground. As the years passed, exhaustion and the desperate desire to keep my family together had softened me. When Fletcher returned defeated 5 years ago with his wife and kids, I let him link a mobile app to a secondary checking account fed by my master account. I gave him an extension on my Platinum credit card. I gave him the illusion of control because I wanted him to recover his dignity as a family man. But the master account, the financial beating heart of my entire estate, was still governed by the original contract I now held in my hands. I closed the folder. Nostalgia had no place in this room. Nostalgia is a deceptive filter that softens the edges of betrayal. And I needed the raw, high-contrast image. I stood up, turned off the red light, and walked out of the dark room. I went to my ground-floor bedroom, took off the apron stained with flour and butter, and threw it into the bottom of the laundry hamper. I opened my closet. I didn't reach for the comfortable grandma clothes Lauren bought me on clearance so I'd match my role as the live-in nanny. I reached into the very back, where I kept the wardrobe of the woman who built a business from nothing. I pulled out a dark gray linen-tailored suit, a white silk blouse that still held the perfect dry cleaner's crease, and sensible low-heeled shoes. I dressed with the slow deliberation of a soldier strapping on armor before stepping onto a battlefield she knows by heart. I sat at my vanity, pulled my white hair back into a tight bun, and applied a discreet but firm shade of red lipstick. I put on my real pearl earrings, the only ones Ray couldn't steal. I grabbed my black leather purse, slid the manila folder inside, and walked out of my room. I didn't look at the messy house. My mind was already miles ahead, calculating the trajectory of the strike. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The mid-morning sun was already beating down, promising a suffocating day. As I walked down the tiled path toward the sidewalk, I heard the rhythmic snip of pruning shears. On the other side of the low, wrought-iron fence stood Marge. Marge was 73. She was a retired school teacher, widowed for 2 decades. She was the kind of woman who monitored the neighborhood with the precision of a hawk, possessing a tongue as sharp as the shears she used to decapitate the dead roses in her garden. We had known each other since Fletcher and his kids weren't even a blueprint. "Connie," she called out, lowering her shears and leaning against the fence. "Looking awfully elegant. And awfully strange. I could swear I saw Fletcher and Lauren running out of here with the kids and suitcases the size of refrigerators just a couple of hours ago. I thought the cab had forgotten you." You were going to the beach, right? I stopped in front of her. I could have lied. I could have invented an excuse about a sudden stomach bug or urgent paperwork that kept me from traveling. That was the custom for mothers of our generation, covering up our children's sins with the blanket of our own invention to save face. But the era of keeping up appearances died the second my son ordered me to scrub the kitchen. They didn't forget me, Marge, I replied, my voice calm and level in the hot morning air. Fletcher decided at the last minute that my presence on the trip was an unnecessary expense and that the kids needed space. I was informed that my vacation would consist of staying here to clean the house and water the backyard plants. Marge dropped her shears onto the grass with a dull thud. Her eyes, framed by fine laugh lines, went wide. Her disbelief rapidly morphed into a silent, simmering indignation, the kind of unified sisterly fury that only another woman our age can fully comprehend. "They left you behind?" she asked, dropping her voice as if the words were too ugly to speak aloud. "After you paid every last red cent for that damn luxury trip, because I know for a fact Lauren hasn't worked a single day since they invaded your living room, Connie." "They took the platinum credit card too," I added, staring directly into my neighbor's eyes. "Fletcher told me the hotel needed the physical plastic for the security deposit, and they left." Marge pressed her lips together into a thin white line. She looked at my house, noting the half-drawn curtains and the dead silence radiating from the property. "Connie, if you need us to go find a lawyer, my nephew is excellent. We can—" "I don't need a lawyer, Marge," I interrupted softly, offering a smile completely devoid of joy. "I need to go to the bank. And I need you to call me immediately if you see a moving truck, a cab, or any unknown vehicle pull up to my house this afternoon." Marge held my gaze for a long second. She saw the cold resolve in my posture, the gray suit, the leather purse tucked tightly under my arm. A spark of recognition flared in her pupils. She realized she wasn't talking to the resigned grandmother. She was talking to the owner of the estate. "Not a single leaf will blow across your driveway without me writing it down in my notepad, Connie," she said firmly, picking up her shears. "Do what you have to do, and for the love of God, don't wash a single dish in that kitchen." "I don't plan to," I replied, turning on my heel to walk toward the main avenue. I hailed a cab at the corner. The ride to the financial district took about 20 minutes, time I spent watching the dense city traffic through the window. I thought about Fletcher. Right about now, they'd be boarding the plane. Lauren was probably complaining about the legroom in coach, while Fletcher scrolled through his phone, completely confident that the family fund, that magical well that never ran dry, would cover every whim of the trip. The problem with people who have never had to build anything from scratch is that they are entirely ignorant of how foundations work. They see the finished building and assume it belongs to them simply because they live inside it. The cab pulled up to the main branch of the bank. It was an imposing structure with marble columns and revolving glass doors, a place designed to intimidate debtors and reassure creditors. I pushed through the doors and stepped inside. The air conditioning hit my face, instantly cooling the sweat on my forehead. The low hum of financial transactions, the clacking of keyboards, and the whir of printers filled the massive lobby. I didn't walk toward the quick-service teller lines. I walked straight to the commercial platform area, where mahogany desks replaced plastic counters. I approached the reception assistant, a young woman wearing a wireless headset. "Good morning. I need to see Ernest Sterling," I said, placing my hands flat on her desk. The girl looked at me with a hollow, professional smile. "Mr. Sterling is the branch general manager, ma'am. He only takes meetings by appointment for high-net-worth accounts. Would you like me to direct you to a standard account executive? Tell Mr. Sterling that Connie Valletta is here, and tell him I am here to execute the security clause on the master account ending in 479. The assistant blinked, rattled by my tone and the precision of the numbers. She typed my name into her computer. Her expression drastically shifted in a matter of seconds. The hollow smile vanished, replaced by an attitude of genuine, urgent service. "Right away, Mrs. Valletta. Please give me one moment." She picked up the phone, murmured a few words, and immediately stood up, guiding me with an open hand. "Mr. Sterling will see you right now. Right this way, please." Ernest's office was at the end of the hall, behind a frosted glass door. When I walked in, he was already standing, buttoning his suit jacket. Ernest was a man in his 50s, with silver hair and impeccable manners. He had been the junior executive who helped me 15 years ago when I opened the account after Ray walked out. He was the branch director now, but he never forgot who his founding clients were. "Ms. Connie, what a wonderful surprise. Please take a seat," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "Can I offer you a coffee? Water?" "Water will be fine, Ernest, thank you." I waited for him to hand me the cold glass of water. I took a sip, settled into the chair, and opened my leather purse. I pulled out the manila folder and slid it across the polished surface of his desk until it rested right in front of him. "Ernest, this is not a social visit. I need to execute immediate restrictive movements on my financial structure." He caught the tone of my voice, sat down, put on his reading glasses, and opened the folder. He saw the original contract. "Tell me what you need, Connie. You know I'm at your complete disposal." "First, I want to report the Platinum credit card ending in 8813 as compromised. I want it blocked immediately, with absolutely no possibility of digital or telephone reactivation. A total hard block for fraud." Ernest frowned, his fingers already flying across his computer keyboard. "Was it stolen? Do you want us to file a police report?" "It wasn't stolen on the street. I handed it to my son Fletcher, under the premise that it would be used to cover the expenses of a family trip that I was supposed to be on. This morning, my son decided to exclude me from the trip, leaving me home with orders to clean up his mess. But he took the plastic, claiming he needed it for the hotel security deposit. I am revoking my authorization for that line of credit. If he tries to swipe it, I want the system to reject it irrevocably." Ernest stopped typing. He looked up over the rim of his glasses, staring at me with a mix of professional shock and profound human understanding. He knew the history. He knew I had mortgaged and paid off my house with the sweat of my brow. "Connie, if I flag the card as compromised with a hard block, the alert will trigger the second they attempt to charge. If they are at a hotel and request a pre-authorization, the terminal won't just decline it. The bank will freeze any other payment attempt linked to that plastic. They will be left with zero physical credit." "That is exactly the intention, Ernest. Proceed." The manager nodded silently. The clack of the keys echoed in the enclosed office. "Done. Platinum card blocked. Is there anything else?" "Yes, the secondary checking account linked to Fletcher's mobile app, the one we call the Family Fund." "I see it right here on my screen," Ernest said, adjusting his glasses. "It has a considerable balance. It's the money you transferred 3 weeks ago for the coastal trip. I want you to drain that secondary account. Transfer 100% of the funds back into my individual master account. Then I want you to revoke the access permissions for Fletcher's mobile app to the master account. I want his phone to be a useless piece of glass when he tries to check my balances." Ernest leaned back in his chair, evaluating the sheer gravity of what I was asking. "Connie, I completely understand your position, but I need to warn you about the operational reality of this. If I move these funds right now and revoke app access, the secondary account drops to absolute zero. If your son tries to pay for a return flight, food at the hotel, or any emergency using the app, he thinks he controls the transaction will be declined for insufficient funds. They will be completely stranded. No physical card, no digital funds." I kept my spine perfectly straight. I didn't break eye contact. The image of Lauren pushing my plate of pancakes away with disgust, and the sound of Fletcher telling me, "Stay here and clean the house," replayed in my mind with bone-chilling clarity. "Ernest, I am a 71-year-old woman. I spent the last 3 decades of my life making absolutely sure my son never lacked a roof, a hot meal, or financial backing. Today he proved to me that my sacrifice didn't forge a grateful man. It forged a comfortable tyrant." "Drain the account." The general manager asked no further questions. He printed 3 sheets of paper, dense with banking jargon, account numbers, and declarations revoking power of attorney. He handed me a heavy black ink pen. I read every single line with my methodical mind, ensuring there were no legal loopholes. I signed the 3 sheets with the exact same ruthless determination I used when I signed my divorce papers from Ray. The black ink sealed the fate of my son's vacation. The funds have been transferred to your master account, Connie. The secondary is at 0. The physical card is dead. It takes the system a couple of hours to update across the international network. By the time your son walks up to the counter of that 5-star hotel, he won't have a single cent to his name. Thank you, Ernest. I knew I could count on you. I packed my copies into the manila folder, stood up and shook his hand. I walked out of the bank feeling like the air was lighter, like my lungs were filling with pure oxygen for the first time in 5 years. I took a cab back to my neighborhood. I got home just after noon. The silence was still there, waiting for me. Marge wasn't in her garden, but I noticed her living room curtains twitch slightly when I opened my front gate. She was on watch. I stepped inside. The heat was starting to build in the hallway, so I opened the living room windows to let the breeze push out the stale air. I walked past Hudson's discarded shoes. I didn't pick them up. I went into the kitchen. The orange juice spilled on the clean tablecloth had dried into a sticky, yellowish stain. The skillet with the burnt butter residue sat on the cold stove. I poured myself a glass of tap water, leaned against the granite counter and looked at the wall clock. 1:15 p.m. The flight should have landed. They were probably at baggage claim, grabbing those massive suitcases my son had dragged across my hardwood floors. Suddenly, the silence of the house shattered. My cell phone, resting in the pocket of my gray jacket, began to vibrate and ring insistently. I pulled it out. Fletcher's name flashed across the screen. I didn't answer on the first ring. I let it ring 3 times, feeling the weight of the plastic in my hand, savoring the absolute control of the moment. On the 4th ring, I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice entirely neutral and calm. "Mom." Fletcher's voice was frantic, backed by the typical chaotic noise of a crowded airport loudspeaker announcements, rolling luggage, the echo of hundreds of people. "You finally picked up. We landed. The kids are being unbearable. Lauren has a migraine from the cabin pressure, and baggage claim took forever. What an awful trip." "I can only imagine how exhausted you all must be, son," I replied, deploying my best dry irony, the exact tone he usually mistook for genuine maternal concern. "Yeah, total disaster. Listen, we're walking to the taxi line to head to the resort. I wanted to check on something. Did you clean the kitchen yet? Lauren left some stuff out, and she doesn't want it getting swarmed by ants. Also, remember to water the plants. With this heat, they'll die fast." I closed my eyes for a second. The sheer audacity of his words was so immense, it was almost fascinating. He was thousands of miles away, spending my money, and he was still issuing maintenance orders. "Don't worry about the house, Fletcher," I said, opening my eyes and staring dead at the juice stain on the tablecloth. "Everything is in the exact same place you left it. Not a single dish has moved." "Perfect. Oh, one more thing. I need you to open the banking app on your phone." The moment had arrived. The jaws of the trap were about to snap shut. "The banking app, what for, son? You said you managed everything from your smartphone." Yeah, I manage it," he snapped impatiently, raising his voice over the airport din. "But sometimes when you make large out-of-state payments, the system requires a security confirmation from the primary device. We're going to hit the hotel in about 40 minutes, and I need to put down the security deposit with the Platinum card and pay the first installment of the excursions with the app fund. I just want to make sure everything is good. Did you make any transactions today?" I pushed off the kitchen counter. I walked slowly into the living room, staring down at the dirty coffee mugs. The symmetry of the moment was flawless. He had weaponized his supposed technological and financial superiority to leave me behind, treating me like a penniless maid. Now, that exact same technology was going to hit him back with mathematical precision. "Actually, yes, Fletcher," I said, my voice ringing as clear and cold as ice. "I went out a little while ago. I had to go to the bank to handle some business." "To the bank? Why would you physically go to the bank? I have the app." "Look, whatever, as long as you didn't touch the family fund, it's fine. See you in a few days, Mom. Rest up and make sure you mop the upstairs floors." "Enjoy the hotel, son. I am absolutely sure the reception will be unforgettable." "Yeah, bye," he said, and cut the line without waiting for my reply. I lowered the phone. The screen went dark. I sat down on my living room sofa, completely ignoring the scattered cushions, and opened my own banking app. I typed in my security passcode. The screen illuminated with the data from my master account. The balance reflected the entirety of my life's savings, secure, locked down, and utterly inaccessible to anyone breathing on this earth except me. I scrolled down to look at the secondary account, the infamous family fund. Available balance, $0. Platinum card status, canceled by owner. I leaned back against the sofa cushions, folded my hands in my lap, and let out a long, deep exhale. The wall clock kept ticking away, relentless. 40 minutes, Fletcher had said. 40 minutes until a cab dropped them off at the glass doors of a five-star paradise they had absolutely no way to pay for. 40 minutes until the hotel manager informed my son that the maid he left scrubbing his house had just quit taking the keys to the kingdom with her. The real family vacation was just beginning, and for the first time in years, I had the best seat in the house to watch the fall. The tick-tock of the wall clock perfectly matched the rhythm of my breathing in the living room. I sat on the sofa, my back perfectly straight, my hands folded in my lap, observing the space around me. The midday light bled through the blinds, casting illuminated lines of suspended dust in the hot air. Right in front of me, the oak table displayed the 3 abandoned coffee mugs, the dark stains already dried into the polished wood. To my left, a mountain of obnoxiously bright plastic toys blocked the pathway to the hall. To my right, a pair of Lauren's designer shoes rested on my Persian rug, as if the mess itself was a rite of conquest. For 5 years, I had looked at this room and seen a family. I had forced my brain to apply a warm filter over the chaos, convincing myself that the mess meant life, that my bone-deep exhaustion was just the natural price of being the pillar for my own blood. But now, with the silence wrapping around the house and my bank account secured, the filter had dissolved. What I was looking at wasn't a home full of life. It was a scene meticulously staged for my own servitude. I wasn't the respected matriarch. I was the live-in maid bankrolling my own employers. In professional photography, there is a concept called depth of field. It's the zone of the image that appears sharp while everything else blurs into the background. For decades, my son Fletcher had been my singular focal point. Everything else, my own needs, my exhaustion. The blatant disrespect was left blurry, thrown out of focus by my maternal instinct. But instincts can be dangerously deceptive if you refuse to look at the original negatives. The first time I noticed a blemish on the negative wasn't this morning. It was 25 years ago. Fletcher was 12, and the Christmas season had just wrapped up. I had worked 14-hour days at the studio shooting strangers' families in matching sweaters, just so I could buy him the imported mountain bike he had begged for. It was an absurd expense for our budget, but Ray, my ex-husband, had insisted our boy couldn't look poorer than his private school friends. A week after Christmas, I found the bike thrown in the driveway with a broken chain and a severely scratched frame. Fletcher had just dropped it on the concrete to go inside and play video games. When I confronted him and asked him to help me clean it up to take to the repair shop, Ray stepped in. "Let it go, Connie. He's just a kid. If it breaks, we'll buy another one. That's why you work so hard." I remember looking at Fletcher in that exact moment. There was no guilt in his 12-year-old eyes. There was a tiny, crooked smirk, a look of pure superiority aimed right at me. In a fraction of a second, he had understood that my effort had zero value, that my labor was an inexhaustible resource at his disposal, and that he would never have to face the consequences of his own carelessness. I took a mental photograph of that smirk, filed it away in the darkest corner of my memory, and forced myself to forget it. But the chemicals of memory always end up developing the truth given enough time. I stood up from the couch. The era of passive contemplation was over. The methodical mind that allowed me to build a business in an era when women rarely owned their own studios took absolute control of my limbs. I walked to the kitchen landline, ignoring the plate of pancakes still sitting on the table. I picked up the receiver and dialed the number I knew by heart. "The padlock locksmith, good afternoon," a raspy voice answered on the other end. "Artie, it's Connie Valeda. I need your services at my house immediately. Mrs. Connie, great to hear from you. Did you lock yourself out again? Joked the old man, who had been running his small shop 3 streets over for 40 years. No, Artie, I'm inside, but I need you to change the locks on the front door, the back door, and the garage side door. And I need you to install high-security cylinders, the ones with the computerized keys that can't be copied at any random hardware store. There was a brief pause on the line. Artie knew my family. He had watched Fletcher grow up. Did something happen, Mrs. Connie? Did someone try to break in? Something like that, Artie. But the robbery ended today. Can you be here in 10 minutes? I'll pay double your emergency rate in cash. I'll be there in 5, Mrs. Connie. Put the coffee on. I hung up the phone, walked to my bedroom, pulled a stack of bills from the mechanical safe I hid behind the old photo albums in my closet, and walked back to the living room. Just as I hit the hallway, the back doorbell rang. It was Marge. My neighbor pushed through the screen door into the kitchen. She was carrying a glass pitcher full of ice-cold lemonade and 2 glasses. Her eyes scanned the disaster in the kitchen with a mix of disgust and unified fury. "I saw you come back in a cab an hour ago," she said, setting the pitcher on the granite counter, safely away from the spilled orange juice. "I figured you could use something cold to drink, and maybe some help throwing the garbage that woman left all over your living room into trash bags." I offered a tight smile. Marge wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a tactical ally who spoke the fluent language of domestic survival. "I'll gladly take the lemonade, Marge, but we aren't throwing anything in the garbage. I'm not going to hand them a property damage argument so they can play the victim. We are going to pack." Before Marge could ask another question, the front doorbell rang. I went to open it. Artie was standing there with his heavy metal toolbox, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a cloth handkerchief. I let him in. For the next hour, the whine of drills, the squeak of screwdrivers, and the clatter of metal completely replaced the oppressive silence of the house. Marge and I sat on the kitchen stools drinking lemonade, watching Artie dismantle the old brass lock on the front door, the exact same lock Fletcher had copied for Lauren the day they moved in. As I watched the old cylinder drop into Artie's palm, another negative from my memory developed right before my eyes with agonizing clarity. It was 4 years ago. Lauren had been living under my roof for a year. I had gone out to buy fever medicine for my grandson Hudson, an expense that came entirely out of my pocket, naturally. When I got back, I noticed the downstairs hallway looked different. I walked up to the massive mahogany console table I had inherited from my grandmother. I used to keep a collection of my favorite silver-framed photographs there, black and white portraits of my parents, a picture of Fletcher as a baby, and a few landscapes I shot during my early travels. Every single frame was gone. In their place sat a massive, hideous, modern ceramic vase, surrounded by fashion magazines and a catch-all bowl for keys. I found Lauren in the kitchen filing her nails and drinking a glass of the wine I had been saving for a special occasion. I asked her about my photographs. She didn't even look me in the eye. "Oh, Connie," she drawled, dragging out the syllables with her usual condescension. "I packed them up in a cardboard box and put them in the garage. That table looked way too gloomy, like a shrine for the dead. The kids need a modern vibe with good energy. Besides, you're always hiding in your little dark room anyway. You can look at your pictures in there." I went to the garage and found the box. Someone had tossed a bag of dirty shoes right on top of it, shattering the glass on my parents' portrait. I knelt on the cold concrete floor, picking up the glass shards with my bare hands. I sliced my index finger open. My blood stained the edge of the silver frame. In that exact moment, I should have thrown her out on the street. I should have carried that box into the kitchen and demanded she vacate my property. But I didn't. I bandaged my finger, shoved the box under my bed, and scrubbed up my own blood in silence. I justified her cruelty, telling myself she was just stressed about being broke, that she was a young mother trying to nest in someone else's house. I had been a coward wearing the mask of a martyr. The metallic snap of the new lock clicking into the door yanked me back to the present. "All set, Mrs. Connie," Artie announced, wiping his hands on a rag. 3 brand new high-security deadbolts. Here are the only 3 copies of the keys in existence. You couldn't pop these with a professional lockpick without making a racket loud enough to wake the dead. I paid him his quoted rate and handed him a generous tip. I walked him out and listened to the solid, definitive thwack of the deadbolt locking from the inside. It was a beautiful sound. It was the sound of a restored border. I turned back to Marge, who had already started gathering the plastic toys in the living room and tossing them into an empty cardboard box she found in the hall. "Leave that, Marge. The toys go upstairs to the room they slept in. What we are packing today are the adults' belongings." I went to the utility closet and pulled out 2 massive rolls of thick black plastic contractor bags, the kind you use for heavy yard debris. I walked back into the living room. "What exactly do you have in mind, Connie?" my neighbor asked, a spark of pure anticipation dancing in her eyes. "We are going to clean the house exactly like my son ordered me to," I replied, snapping the first bag open with a sharp flick of my wrists. We started in the living room. I tossed Lauren's designer shoes into the bottom of the bag. Then I walked over to the entryway console, scooped up all the fashion magazines, the absurd decorative bowls, and that god-awful modern ceramic vase, and shoved them all into the black bags. Marge kept pace with military efficiency, clearing the coffee table, grabbing the jackets Fletcher abandoned on the armchairs, and emptying the hallway drawers where they had hoarded years of junk mail and receipts for useless purchases. We marched up to the second floor. The heat was heavier up there. The room that was once my pristine guest room was now a war zone of unfolded laundry, cosmetics scattered across the dresser, and half-emptied suitcases they decided not to take on the trip. I wasn't gentle. I didn't fold Fletcher's linen shirts, and I didn't separate Lauren's lace underwear. I grabbed massive armfuls of clothing straight off the shelves and dropped them into the black bags. I swept the expensive cosmetics paid for by the family fund, of course, into the trash bags right alongside the shoes. The sound of crinkling plastic filling with dead weight was the soundtrack of my emancipation. Marge worked in silence, but her heavy breathing betrayed how deeply satisfying she found the task. We filled 6 massive bags with just the master bedroom's contents. Then we hit the shared bathroom. I cleared out every exfoliating scrub, imported shampoo, and electric razor. I shoved it all into another bag. As I tied a tight, vicious knot at the top of the 7th black bag, sweat rolled down my forehead and my hands stung. The physical labor was grueling for a woman my age, but the energy pumping through my veins was pure adrenaline. Every single object I removed from my sight was a tiny victory, one less brick in the wall of humiliation they had built around me. We dragged the heavy bags down the stairs step by step, careful not to scratch the wood. We stacked them in the entryway, right next to the newly secured front door. 7 massive black contractor bags stuffed with the entire identities of the 2 people who had treated me like a defective kitchen appliance. Marge wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, staring at the mountain of bags, with a deeply satisfied smile lighting up her wrinkled face. "If you could see your face right now, Connie," she chuckled under her breath, "you look 20 years younger. What are you going to do with all this?" "When they get back, and I guarantee you it won't take them many days to return, they will find their luggage packed and ready for their permanent move," I replied, leaning against the banister to catch my breath. "They're going to think you've lost your mind. They'll think this is just a fit of rage over what happened this morning." I slowly shook my head. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the tap, and splashed my face with freezing water. The icy shock cleared out any lingering shadow of doubt left in my system. "This wasn't a fit of rage, Marge. Anger is messy. It's impulsive. Today is the result of methodical observation. They think the trigger was the beach trip, but the trip was just the perfect excuse to execute a plan I drew up 6 months ago." Marge frowned, stepping closer to the counter. 6 months? What happened 6 months ago, Connie?" I dried my face with a clean towel, looked my neighbor dead in the eye, and let the third and final negative, the darkest one of them all, see the light of day. It was mid-November last year. It was freezing. I was in my darkroom, the space they absolutely loathed because it smelled like old chemicals. I had shut the heavy wooden door to organize some old tax receipts. They thought I had gone to the supermarket. Fletcher and Lauren were standing in the hallway, right on the other side of my sanctuary door. They were talking quietly. but loud enough for the acoustics of this old house to carry every single syllable to me with terrifying clarity. "How much longer do we have to endure this museum decor?" Lauren had complained, her heels clicking on the wood. "Your friends are coming over on Friday, and I'm embarrassed for them to see your mother's furniture, not to mention her mothball smell." "Patience, babe," Fletcher had replied, his voice the voice of the baby I nursed. The young man whose tuition I paid sounded icy, calculating, completely devoid of any affection. "The old lady is 70. She doesn't have much independent time left. While she keeps paying the bills, the mortgage, and the kids' school, we can save our own money. The second her mind or her health starts to go, we stick her in a nice nursing home, using her own pension. We sell this outdated giant house, buy the condo up north, and problem solved. Just keep smiling at her and let her think she's the boss of the kitchen. She loves feeling useful." I was sitting on my wooden stool, surrounded by darkness, listening to my only child plan my exile and my social death, as if he were discussing a real estate transaction. I didn't cry. The pain was so profound, so agonizingly sharp, that it bypassed the capacity for tears entirely. It was a clean slice, straight through my soul. In that dark room, I realized I wasn't raising a family. I was harboring two parasites, patiently waiting for the host to die so they could devour the remains. From that day forward, I stopped being the selfless mother and became the cartographer of my own defense. I audited every bank statement. I mapped exactly how they were draining my money. I isolated the master account, making sure Fletcher only had access to the monthly cash flow I actively permitted. I played the role of the docile old woman. I cooked their pancakes, I ironed his white shirts, I watched them grow bolder in their arrogance, and I waited for the exact moment their own greed would leave them utterly vulnerable. The luxury resort trip was the stage they built for their own execution. Marge listened to me in absolute silence. The smile had vanished from her face. Her eyes shined with a mix of sheer horror and profound, unbreakable respect. "My God, Connie," she whispered, covering her mouth. "What kind of monsters do we raise sometimes, without even realizing it?" "We aren't responsible for the choices they make as adults, Marge. But we are entirely responsible for not leaving a loaded gun in their hands the second we realize who they really are." We finished cleaning the kitchen. I threw the cold pancakes in the trash, scrubbed the juice stain until the tablecloth was pristine, and boiled the dirty skillet. The house, though, emptied of their superfluous junk and guarded by black bags in the hallway, smelled like lemon and wood wax again. It smelled like my home again. Marge said goodbye mid-afternoon. She assured me she'd leave her living room window cracked open to listen for any noise and keep her phone nearby. I locked the new deadbolt behind her, double-checking the firm resistance of the mechanism. I walked into the dining room and sat at the head of the table, a chair I hadn't occupied since Fletcher claimed it 5 years ago, arguing he needed the legroom. I opened my manila folder and spread the signed bank documents across the clean wood, the blocked account receipts, the fund transfer logs, the platinum card cancellation. Everything was in perfect order. The dossier was complete. The sun began to dip, painting the inside of the house in shades of burnt orange and deep red. The wall clock struck 5 p.m. It had been almost 4 hours since I spoke to Fletcher on the phone. 4 hours since he, drunk on his own superiority, strutted toward the reception of a 5-star hotel with his haughty wife and massive suitcases. My cell phone vibrated on the dining table, shattering the sepulchral silence of the late afternoon. I looked at the screen. It wasn't Fletcher. It was an unknown number, a long international area code full of zeros. The exact kind of number used by luxury hotel switchboards or international assistance lines. I let it ring. The vibration dragged the phone millimeters across the polished wood. I watched the numbers blink on the blank screen with the exact same cold detachment a lab technician watches a highly predictable chemical reaction. The system had worked. The physical card had bounced. The mobile app had flashed a zero balance. The public humiliation, the exact same humiliation they had served me in the privacy of my own kitchen, was currently executing live in front of sharp-suited receptionists and wealthy guests. The phone stopped ringing. The screen went black. 10 seconds later, it lit up again. This time, the graduation photo I had taken of Fletcher myself popped up on the screen. He was calling from his own line, probably burning through his emergency roaming data, desperate. I rested my elbows on the mahogany table, interlaced my fingers beneath my chin, and stared unblinking at the vibrating phone. The trap had snapped shut with a metallic clack, just as definitive and solid as the new deadbolt on my front door. The entitled little boy who broke bicycles without remorse, and the cold man who plotted my exile to a nursing home, were about to discover that the woman who developed the photographs, the woman they ordered to stay behind and clean, had always been the one holding the camera. I took a deep breath, tasting the clean air of my reconquered home, and reached for the phone. The vacation had just begun. I swiped my finger across the glass screen, accepting the call, and brought the device to my ear with deliberate slowness. The absolute protective silence of my dining room violently clashed with the chaos exploding out of the tiny speaker. I heard the elegant hum of a hotel lobby, the distant clinking of crystal glasses, soft piano music in the background, and cutting through it all, the ragged, practically suffocating breathing of my son. "Mom!" Fletcher gasped. His voice had completely lost the bored condescension from this morning. It was flooded with sharp, deeply humiliating panic. "Mom, the bank's system is crashing. You need to call your branch right now. Tell that manager of yours to fix this disaster." I kept my eyes locked on the wood grain of my mahogany table. I didn't shift my posture. "Good afternoon, Fletcher. Did you make it to the hotel? How's the weather on the coast?" "To hell with the weather, Mom," he roared, completely losing his composure, forgetting he was standing in the lobby of a five-star resort. The platinum card bounced. The receptionist ran it through 3 different terminals, and the machine says it's retained for fraud. And that's not even the worst part. I opened the app to try and wire a direct transfer, and the family fund is at 0. 0, Mom, what did you do at the bank? I leaned one elbow on the table and rested my chin in my free hand. I could picture the scene perfectly. Fletcher, his white linen shirt wrinkled from travel, sweating cold bullets in front of an imported marble counter. Lauren, standing next to him, with her designer sunglasses pushed up into her hair, feeling the stares of the wealthy guests burning into them as they recognized the unmistakable stench of financial rejection. "There is no error in the system, son," I replied, my voice flowing with the steady calm of an underground river. "I did exactly what I told you I did. I went out to handle some business. I blocked the card for unauthorized use, and I transferred my money from my labor back into the master account, the one you no longer have access to." A crushing silence fell over the line. The noise of the lobby seemed to fade away as Fletcher's brain scrambled to process the sheer magnitude of my words. When he finally spoke again, his tone had dropped 2 octaves, replacing panic with furious disbelief. "Are you out of your mind? You canceled my cards while I'm 1,000 miles from home." We're standing at the reception desk, Connie. I have my kids crying from exhaustion, suitcases on the floor, and a guy in a suit staring at me like I'm a vagrant trying to steal towels. "Unlock that account immediately." "No." The syllable was short, dry, as sharp as a guillotine blade dropping. It was the first time in 46 years I had given him an absolute no. No justifications, no apologetic tone, no backdoor left open for negotiation. "What do you mean, no?" Fletcher stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "Mom, this isn't funny. Lauren is about to have a nervous breakdown. The airport cab charged us a fortune, and I told him I'd bill it to the room. We don't have cash. We have no way to pay the deposit. We don't even have a way to pay for a flight back if they throw us out of here." "You told me this morning that the vacation was strictly for you, Fletcher," I reminded him, savoring every single word, feeding him his own poison in exact doses. "You told me the money belonged to the family, and that the family was just you, your wife, and your kids. Well, if you are the family, then, as the head of that family, it is your job to provide. The trip is yours. The expenses are too." I heard a scuffle on the other end of the line, the dull clack of plastic hitting something, followed by Lauren's shrill, hysterical voice. She had snatched the phone from him. "Look, lady," my daughter-in-law screamed, entirely dropping the filter of fake elegance she had maintained for 5 years. "Stop throwing a resentful old woman's tantrum. Do us a favor, call the bank and fix this. I am not going to let my children suffer this public humiliation because of your complexes. People are staring at us." I closed my eyes for a second. The image of Lauren batting my plate of pancakes away with disdain flashed in my mind. "Public humiliations are terrible, aren't they, Lauren?" I said softly. "Especially when you don't have the funds to pay the tab for your own arrogance. But don't worry. Fletcher is an absolute expert at managing the banking app from his smartphone. I am entirely sure that he, being so modern and capable, will find a way to solve this without the help of an old woman who is only good for cleaning the house." "You are a monster," she shrieked. "You left us stranded." "No, Lauren. You left me stranded in my own kitchen. I just stopped putting gas in the getaway car. By the way, tell the kids I love them very much, and I wish the two of you the best of luck finding a bus back home. Oh, and don't call me again. I'm very busy cleaning the house exactly like I was ordered to." I didn't wait for her to respond. I pressed the red button on the screen and killed the call. I immediately went into my phone's settings and blocked both Fletcher's and Lauren's numbers. Then, I powered the device off completely and left it face down on the dining table. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't oppressive. It was a flawless melody. I stood up from the table and walked into the kitchen. The late afternoon sun bathed the granite counters in a warm golden light. For the first time in half a decade, I didn't have to cook separate dinners. I didn't have to listen to complaints about the food having too much salt or too little. I didn't have to wash dishes I hadn't dirtied. I went to the pantry and pulled out a bottle of red wine I had bought years ago, hiding it behind cans of soup so Lauren wouldn't drink it on one of her lazy afternoons. I uncorked it. I poured myself a generous glass. That night, I made myself a pan-seared steak with asparagus. My absolute favorite meal, the exact one I never cooked because Fletcher hated the smell of roasting meat in the house. I ate at the dining table, savoring every bite, sipping the wine slowly while I stared at the 7 black trash bags piled in my entryway, standing like plastic sentinels guarding my newly reclaimed freedom. When it was time for bed, I walked up the stairs. I passed the room they used to occupy. The door was wide open. Inside, the beds were unmade, the closets were empty, and the air no longer smelled of expensive perfume. It smelled of dust and cardboard boxes. I went back down to my own bedroom on the ground floor, slipped into a clean cotton nightgown, and slid between the sheets. I expected to feel guilt. I expected the ghost of maternal love to ambush me in the dead of night, torturing me with images of my grandkids sleeping on plastic airport chairs. But my strategic mind knew the kids were never in actual danger. Lauren had parents in another city. Fletcher had friends. Someone would wire them enough cash for a cheap bus ticket. They would suffer extreme discomfort, yes. They would suffer massive humiliation, absolutely. But they wouldn't die. The guilt never arrived. Instead, I experienced a deep, uninterrupted, and profoundly restorative sleep. The first real night of rest I had since Ray left me. Dawn found me in the kitchen, brewing coffee in the old Italian percolator. The rich aroma of roasted beans filled the house. It was 7 a.m. I walked out into the backyard with my steaming mug. The grass was green. The rose bushes in the corners needed pruning, but the plants were alive. Exactly as Fletcher had ordered, I grabbed the hose and began watering the dry dirt. The cold water hitting the leaves made a rhythmic, peaceful sound. I was following his orders. I had stayed home, and I was watering the plants. Only now, I was doing it as the absolute, undisputed owner of the land. Mid-morning, the back doorbell rang. Marge breezed in with her usual boundless energy, carrying a cloth-covered plate. "I made cornbread," she announced, dropping it on the kitchen island. "Any updates from the front lines, General?" I sat across from her and poured her a cup of coffee. The hotel reception called yesterday afternoon. The card rejection was loud and very public. I blocked their numbers. I imagine they spent a very interesting night trying to scrape together funds to get back. Marge let out a dry bark of laughter, shaking her head. I talked to the lady at the corner store bright and early. She told me she saw Lauren on her sister's social media page, complaining that the bank had frozen their accounts over some IT error and begging for help to buy bus tickets. A bus, Connie. Lady Lauren of the designer bags riding 14 hours in an unreclining seat that smells like cheap bleach. Divine Justice has a marvelous sense of humor. They won't be long now, I said, glancing at the kitchen clock reading 11 a.m. If they took the overnight bus, they should be rolling into city limits right about now. I'll be on my front porch watering my fake hanging plants, Marge said, standing up with a warrior's gleam in her eyes. I wouldn't miss this show for the world. And if they get violent, the neighborhood patrol car passes our street right at 1 p.m. I'll flag them down if things get ugly. Marge left, leaving me alone with the ticking clock. The next few hours were thick and slow. I walked through the house, ensuring everything was in flawless order. Not a single trace of them remained in the common areas. The house had reverted to being mine, a museum of my own history, totally devoid of modern vases or scattered toys. At 1:30 p.m., the unmistakable rattle of a tired engine broke the quiet of the street. I stepped up to the living room window and slightly parted the blinds. A beat-up taxi, the kind that lurks outside bus terminals, pulled up to my gate. The doors swung open. Fletcher got out first. His linen shirt was no longer white. It was a dingy gray stained with sweat and deep, permanent wrinkles. His face reflected a brutal exhaustion, but also a tightly coiled fury that locked his jaw. Then Lauren stepped out. She was carrying little Sophie, who was screaming her lungs out and dragging Hudson by the hand. My daughter-in-law's makeup was smeared. Her flawless hair was a rat's nest of tangles, and she walked with a noticeable limp, probably from wearing heels on a 14-hour bus ride. The cab driver hauled the two massive suitcases out of the trunk and dumped them on the sidewalk. Fletcher argued with the driver for a full minute, gesturing wildly before pulling a wad of crumpled bills out of his pocket, undoubtedly borrowed cash, and throwing them through the window. The cab sped off instantly, leaving them stranded on the hot concrete under the blistering afternoon sun. I stepped away from the window and walked into the hallway. I stopped right in front of the solid wood front door. The new high-security deadbolt gleamed under the light pouring through the transom window. I smoothed out my gray linen skirt, adjusted my silk blouse, and waited. I heard the rumble of suitcase wheels dragging up the tiled walkway, then heavy footsteps on the porch, the metallic scrape of a key sliding into the lock. A second of silence, the sound of the key trying to turn, grinding uselessly against a mechanism that no longer recognized it. A hard twist to the left, another to the right. Nothing, just metal scraping metal. I heard Fletcher curse under his breath on the other side of the wood. The key won't turn. Then push the damn door, Fletcher, for the love of God, Lauren barked, her voice vibrating with pent-up hysteria. It's boiling out here and the kids are starving. Open the door. The brass knob rattled violently. The door didn't even flinch. Artie's reinforced hinges and deadbolt were an impenetrable wall. Mom! Fletcher's shout pierced the wood, followed by 3 heavy, thudding fist strikes against the door. Mom, open up! The lock is stuck! I didn't move. I let him hammer. I let the sheer panic of being locked out compound the humiliation of the hotel and the torture of the bus ride. I wanted them to feel physically and mentally exactly what it meant to stand on the wrong side of the border they had drawn themselves. Connie! Lauren screamed, slapping the door with an open palm. We know you're in there. Open up! This isn't funny anymore. I took a deep breath, reached out, grabbed the thumb turn of the new deadbolt and twisted it slowly. The metallic clack was loud and definitive, instantly silencing the banging outside. I grabbed the knob and hauled the heavy wooden door inward. Sunlight flooded the hallway, exposing the scene on the porch. Fletcher stood with his arm raised, ready to strike the door again. Lauren was holding the kids, panting heavily. Their faces morphed from instant relief to absolute, unadulterated shock when they looked at me. I wasn't wearing the faded floral apron. I was wearing my tailored suit, my pearl earrings, and an expression that belonged to the CEO of an empire, not the housemaid. And then they looked down. They saw the barricade. 7 massive, bulging black contractor bags, heavy with weight, almost entirely blocking the threshold of the house. What is this? Fletcher mumbled, taking a half step back, his eyes darting from the trash bags to my face. This is the result of my staycation, son, I replied, my voice projecting crisp and firm into the hot air. You told me to stay here and clean. I am a woman who finishes the jobs she starts. I cleaned the living room, I cleaned the kitchen, and I cleaned the second floor. The house has never been so clear. Lauren dropped the little girl to the ground and lunged forward, pointing at the bags with a finger trembling with rage. You put our stuff in trash bags. Our clothes, my cosmetics, in damn yard bags. You are completely insane. Get out of the way. I am going into my house to bathe my kids. Lauren tried to push forward, shoving her knee into one of the bags to force a path. I didn't move a single millimeter. I planted my feet on the hardwood floor and locked eyes with her. A stare so glacial it stopped her dead in her tracks. She crashed directly into the invisible wall of my authority. Take one more step onto my property, Lauren, and I swear to God the police will drag you out of here in handcuffs for trespassing, I said, dropping my voice into a dangerous, lethal whisper. This is not your house. It never was. It was a shelter I loaned you out of pity, and you mistook it for an early inheritance. Fletcher intervened, stepping in front of his wife, desperately playing the absolute last card he had left, emotional blackmail and weaponized pity. Mom, please, he begged, lowering his hands in a gesture of fake surrender. I know you're mad about the trip. I swear to you, I get it. It was a mistake. I was an idiot. I am so sorry. But look at us. We are destroyed. We rode 14 hours sitting next to the bathroom on a second-class bus. We got thrown out of the hotel like stray dogs. We have nowhere to go. We are your family. Your grandkids need their beds. You can't do this to us over a tantrum about a trip. I looked him dead in the eyes. I saw the 12-year-old boy who broke the bike. I saw the young man who ignored me while I wept over his father's debts. I saw the man who ordered me to scrub the floor while he burned my life savings. Do not get confused, Fletcher, I said, my voice ringing with the sheer, undeniable force of 30 years of silent sacrifice. This has absolutely nothing to do with a trip to the beach. The trip was just the stage you chose to show me your true face in public. This is about what happened in mid-November of last year. Fletcher's face went chalk white instantly. The blood completely drained from his sunburnt cheeks. His eyes blinked rapidly, his brain frantically scrolling through his memories. November? He stammered. I don't know what you're talking about. I crossed my arms over my chest. I was in my dark room. You two were in the hallway. You thought I went to the grocery store. I heard you, Fletcher. I heard you perfectly. I heard you comforting your wife, telling her the old lady didn't have much independent time left. I heard your brilliant master plan. Let me keep paying the bills, the groceries, the kids' tuition until my health failed. Then lock me in a nursing home using my own pension. Sell this outdated giant house and buy yourselves a condo up north. The silence that crashed down on the porch was so incredibly heavy it nearly drowned out the children's crying. Lauren slapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute terror, as she realized the ground they walked on had actually vanished months ago. Fletcher looked like he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. All his arrogance, all his technological confidence, all his generational superiority shattered into a million pieces against the stone wall of my memory. I bandaged your knees when you fell, Fletcher. I paid your college tuition, standing on my feet till dawn, developing strangers' photos. I opened my doors when you went bankrupt, and your gratitude was counting the days until my cognitive decline, calculating the market value of my confinement. Mom, that was just a stupid joke. Lauren was stressed out. I just wanted to calm her down. I didn't mean it. He tried to excuse himself, his voice degrading into a pathetic whine. Words are exactly like photographic negatives, son. Once the light hits them, the image is burned in forever. There is no excuse that can unexpose the film. I took a step forward, forcing them to back up toward the edge of the porch. I glanced toward the street. Marge was standing in her garden, leaning on the fence, watching the scene with a notepad in her hand, a silent witness to the fall of the tyrants. Two other neighbors had come out to sweep their driveways, locking their eyes on the drama. The exposure was absolute. "The locks are brand new," I continued, pointing at the gleaming deadbolt. "The bank account you had access to no longer exists. The platinum card is a useless piece of plastic. The only things you own on this property are those 7 black bags. Your suitcases are already outside. The kids' things are in separate bags, labeled and carefully folded, because I do not blame them for the garbage parents they drew in the lottery. But you two will never cross this threshold again, as long as I draw breath." "And where the hell are we supposed to go?" Lauren screamed, crying tears of genuine despair, clawing at Fletcher's arm. "We don't have money. We don't have a house." "Lauren, you wanted a modern vibe without the mothball smell. I'm sure you'll find a fantastic place. Fletcher is the man of the house. I trust he'll solve this using some app on his smartphone." "Mom, for God's sake, the kids," he begged, pointing at Hudson and Sophie, who were staring at me in pure terror. "Punish me, but not them. Don't leave them on the street." My grandmother's heart felt a spike of pure agony, a white-hot needle straight through the chest. I loved those kids. But I knew with absolute certainty that if I yielded now, if I let them cross that door, the cycle of abuse would never end. They would use them as human shields to regain control. "My grandkids will never lack a grandmother," I said, looking at the little ones softly before hardening my gaze back on Fletcher. "But today, Hudson and Sophie need to discover exactly what kind of father they have. They need to watch you solve the problems you created without using the wallet of an old woman you despise. Pick up your trash bags, Fletcher. Start walking." I took a step backward into the house. I kept a firm grip on the brass knob. "Connie, please," Lauren sobbed, taking a step forward, reaching her hand out toward me. There were no more words. There was absolutely nothing left to say. I grabbed the edge of the heavy, solid wood door and pulled it shut with all my strength. The wood blocked out the sun, blocked out the sobbing, and blocked out my son's pathetic begging. The heavy thwack of the door slamming shut echoed like thunder. I twisted the high-security deadbolt, listening to the perfect metallic lock. I stood in the silent hallway, watching the long afternoon shadows stretch across the clean hardwood floors as the desperate, muffled pounding began to rain down on the door from the outside, marking the official start of their new reality. The banging on the solid wood door continued for exactly 10 minutes. At first, they were heavy, desperate hammer strikes, accompanied by Fletcher's hoarse screams, demanding I open up, followed by Lauren's shrill shrieks, cursing my name. I stood in the hallway 3 feet from the entryway, hands folded over my stomach, listening to the symphony of their total collapse. I felt zero fear. The reinforced hinges and the security cylinder Artie had just installed were as unbreakable as my own willpower. Slowly, the fury on the other side of the wood devolved into sheer exhaustion. The banging spaced out, the screams morphed into tense, venomous murmurs, reproaches that were no longer aimed at me, but fired at each other in the suffocating heat of the front porch. I heard Lauren blame Fletcher for not checking the accounts before they traveled. I heard Fletcher blame Lauren for spending so much on the cab and at the airport for her luxury demands that had drained their cash. The facade of the perfect, modern, superior couple was crumbling to dust just inches away from me, surrounded by 7 black trash bags stuffed with their superficial lives. I walked slowly into the living room and sat on the sofa, letting the silence of my home wrap around me like a thick, protective blanket. The wall clock kept up its steady tick-tock, counting down the first minutes of my new life. An hour passed, then 2. The afternoon heat began to break, giving way to the long, creeping shadows of dusk filtering through the blinds. The back doorbell rang with 2 short, familiar taps. I got up and walked to the kitchen. It was Marge. I opened the screen door for her. She walked in, rubbing her hands together, her eyes shining with an almost childlike excitement. "They're gone, Connie," she announced, dropping onto one of the granite island stools. You have to hear this, because it was a spectacle worthy of front-row theater seats. I poured her a glass of cold water and sat across from her, resting my elbows on the pristine counter, ready for the final debrief. Tell me everything, Marge. I don't want to miss a single detail of the move. My neighbor took a long sip, cleared her throat, and launched into her report with the exact precision of a military chronicler detailing an enemy retreat. After you slammed the door in their faces, they stood there shell-shocked for a good while. Lauren tried to kick one of the trash bags, but since it was loaded with her own high heels and heavy cream jars, she practically twisted her ankle and ended up crying out of sheer rage. Then they started screaming at each other right there on the sidewalk. She called him useless, asking how the hell his own mother could leave him on the street. Fletcher pulled out his smartphone, that little gadget he loved showing off, and started making frantic calls. He was pacing back and forth on your walkway, sweating buckets, begging his friends to let them crash at their places. Marge leaned forward, dropping her voice as if sharing classified state secrets. Apparently, nobody wants to host a family of 4 showing up unannounced with suitcases and trash bags. Or maybe his friends were just sick and tired of loaning him money. Finally, after sitting on your curb for almost 2 hours, an old beat-up pickup truck pulled up. One of those cheap man-with-a-van gigs, paint peeling off engine rattling like crazy. The driver, a guy in a filthy baseball cap with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, helped them heave the black bags into the truck bed. Lauren was crying from pure humiliation. She climbed into the passenger seat with the little girl on her lap because there was no room. And Fletcher had to ride in the back, out in the open air, sitting in the truck bed, hugging his trash bags so they wouldn't fly out over the potholes right next to poor Hudson. They drove down the street, hiding their faces, while half the neighborhood watched them from their windows. Old Mrs. Mathers from the corner house actually came out with a broom to pretend she was sweeping, just so she could watch them roll by. A slow, icy smile spread across my lips. The symmetry of the universe is utterly relentless once you stop interfering to soften the blows. They had plotted my silent exit in an ambulance to a nursing home so they could steal the property. Their exit was in the back of a cheap moving truck surrounded by their own garbage, completely exposed to the public mockery of the exact street they looked down upon. "Thank you, Marge," I said, feeling a physical weight, an invisible 5-year anchor completely detached from my shoulders. "I'm sleeping with the windows open tonight. I want to feel the clean draft circulating through every corner of this house." That night, I kept my promise. I threw open the living room windows and the upstairs bedroom sashes. The cool midnight air swept away the very last traces of their expensive perfumes, the sour smell of their panic, and the thick tension baked into the walls. I slept deeply, without a single interruption, without a single jolt, knowing my fortress was impenetrable. The next morning, my true reconstruction began. I didn't waste a single second on useless mourning. I had already lived and processed the grief for the son I thought I had, in absolute silence over the last 6 months, ever since that dark November afternoon in the darkroom. Now it was time to reclaim my territory, inch by inch. I called a trusted crew of professional painters. For 3 days, the house smelled of fresh paint, masking tape, and honest labor. I had the guest room, the one they had mutated into a chaotic wasteland of plastic toys and dirty clothes, painted a brilliant, pearlescent white. I threw the heavy blackout curtains Lauren had installed straight into the trash, replacing them with sheer linen drapes that let the natural sunlight flood in, illuminating corners that had been trapped in the dark. I went to the garage, flipped on the bare overhead bulb, and knelt in front of the dusty cardboard boxes where I had been exiled. I pulled out my silver frames one by one, holding my history. The portrait of my parents, intact, despite the shattered glass I replaced years ago. The photos of my first trips abroad. My old medium-format camera, heavy and solid, which I polished with a microfiber cloth until the metal in the lens shined like new. I carried it all back to the living room. I threw that massive modern ceramic vase they left behind straight into the recycling bin on the curb. I arranged my photographs back on the grand mahogany console, restoring the altar of my own life, right at the main entrance. The first week blurred into a whirlwind of physical activity that pumped vitality back into my joints. I bought fresh flowers for the vases, washed all the sofa slipcovers in lavender fabric softener, and stocked the pantry strictly with foods I actually liked. Nobody demanded pancakes at 6 a.m. Nobody spilled coffee on my clean tablecloths. Nobody complained about the smell of mothballs. The silence was an exquisite companion, a melody I learned to savor with every cup of tea I drank by the kitchen window, watching my rose bushes bloom under the sun. On Thursday of the second week, I put on my navy blue tailored suit, pulled my hair back flawlessly, and took a cab to the financial district. The bank branch was just as cold and bustling as last time, but my footsteps on the marble floor were much lighter, infinitely more dominant. The receptionist recognized me instantly and waved me through without waiting for system authorization. Ernest Sterling welcomed me into his mahogany office, shaking my hand with a smile of professional complicity and absolute respect. "Connie, great to see you. I assume the operational modifications we executed last week had the desired effect during the family vacation." I sat in the leather chair, setting my purse on my lap with measured movements. "They worked flawlessly, Ernest. The surgery was a total success. The patient is completely free of the parasitic tumor. But I am here today to establish a long-term preventative treatment. I do not want to leave any loose ends that might try to detonate in the future." I pulled out a new manila folder, thinner this time, and slid it across the polished desk. "I want to establish a closed, irrevocable educational trust for my grandchildren Hudson and Sophie Valleda. I want a portion of my funds allocated exclusively to pay for their school tuition, their books, and their uniforms until they graduate college. But the rules must be forged in iron, Ernest." The manager put on his reading glasses, giving my words his absolute attention, fully aware of the gravity of the financial architecture I was about to order. "You dictate the rules, Connie. I draft them and we bulletproof them legally. The money will never pass through Fletcher's or Lauren's hands. Not a single liquid cent will ever hit their checking accounts. The bank will wire payments directly to the educational institutions upon presentation of an official stamped invoice. If they need uniforms, the bank pays the vendor. If they need books, the bank pays the bookstore. The parents will have no authorized signature. They cannot request cash reimbursements under any guise of a family emergency, and they will have absolutely no access to the trust's statements to use as collateral for personal loans. If they try to cancel a school enrollment to demand a refund and pocket the cash, the contract must stipulate that the funds automatically revert back to my individual master account." Ernest nodded slowly, taking rapid notes in his leather ledger, clearly admiring the architecture of my defense. The precision of my request didn't shock him. He had known my methodical mind for 15 years. This is a direct pay structure very common in highly conflicted divorces or bulletproofed inheritances involving addiction. It is perfectly viable, Connie. We will armor the fund so your son cannot touch it under any circumstance, not even claiming legal representation of the minors in a state of extreme need. Furthermore, I added, staring dead into his eyes to ensure he understood the absolute finality of my visit, I want to register my updated last will and testament here with the bank's head notary. The house, the remaining accounts, and my entire liquid estate will transfer to a local charity dedicated to abandoned elderly care at the exact moment of my death. Fletcher Valleda is expressly disinherited for lack of moral probity. He will not receive the wooden furniture he despised, nor the spoons in the kitchen. Everything will be liquidated and donated. Ernest set his pen down on the desk. A moment of deep, respectful silence hung in the enclosed office. He knew how agonizing it was for a mother to make that drastic decision, but he also saw the unbreakable resolve in my posture, the total absence of doubt in my eyes. "I will draft the paperwork immediately, Connie. You will need to come back next week with 2 independent witnesses for the notary signature. I will bring my neighbor Marge and Artie the locksmith. They are the most loyal people I know." I walked out of the bank with the absolute certainty that my wall was complete. There were no cracks left for them to drain my life's work through. My grandkids' futures were secured in the essentials, protecting them from their parents' incompetence and negligence, while guaranteeing my son could never use my love for those kids as a bargaining chip for his own benefit. The months began to roll by, shifting the suffocating summer into a mild autumn and then into a gentle winter. My life settled into a routine of absolute peace. I picked up photography again, but this time for pure pleasure, not survival. I turned the old kids' room, now bright and white, into a natural light studio where I spent my afternoons shooting the texture of dead leaves from my garden, the profiles of the birds landing on the porch, and the history-lined wrinkles on the faces of my neighborhood friends. I started selling some of these framed pieces to a small local art gallery. I didn't do it for the money, which was already secured. I did it for the profound, simple joy of knowing my hands were still capable of capturing the beauty of the world without having to cater to impatient clients. News of Fletcher and Lauren reached me like clockwork through Marge's infallible intelligence network. A neighborhood always has eyes everywhere, and the roots of local gossip are infinitely more efficient than any satellite spy grid. One November afternoon, exactly 1 year after I overheard that fatal hallway conversation, Marge walked into my kitchen carrying a tray of freshly baked butter cookies and a poorly disguised look of triumph on her face. "I went to the new mall up north yesterday afternoon," she casually mentioned, pouring herself a cup of chamomile tea from my porcelain teapot. "I needed to buy a gift for my niece. I walked through the cosmetics section of that massive department store. Guess who I saw standing behind the free perfume sample counter looking like she was at a funeral?" I set my camera down on the kitchen table and arched an eyebrow with genuine interest. "You don't say." "Oh, I do say," Marge chuckled, taking a bite of her cookie. Lauren was wearing the mandatory store uniform, this hideous, oversized black polyester jacket and black orthopedic low heels, the kind the girls wear when they stand for 10 hours straight. She was handing out scented paper strips to shoppers rushing by. She looked exhausted, Connie. Her dark roots were screaming for an expensive dye job she clearly can't afford anymore. I walked right up to the counter, plucked a perfume strip straight off her tray, looked her dead in the eye, smiled, and said, "What a wonderfully modern vibe you have in here, dear. So much better than smelling mothballs in a borrowed house." I let out a brief, dry, completely sincere laugh. The irony was so razor-thin, you could cut it with a butter knife. My friend's returned insult was pure poetry. And what did the lady of the designer bags say to that? She turned red as a ripe tomato. Her eyes welled up with tears of pure fury. But since the floor manager was watching her, she dropped her gaze, swallowed hard, and turned around to help someone else playing dumb. I also heard from the butcher's cousin, who has a brother-in-law working at Fletcher's insurance office, that they are renting a microscopic 2-bedroom apartment in a loud, sketchy neighborhood down south. Fletcher had to take out a predatory loan with sky-high interest just to pay the security deposit because his credit score was absolutely nuked when you hard-blocked the platinum card, and those massive hotel charges bounced across the international system. He's working weekend overtime shifts just to pay for groceries and electricity. Marge's detailed report didn't fill me with vulgar joy. It filled me with a deep, cold, silent satisfaction. The scales had balanced with mathematical precision. The universe was charging them the actual rent of adult life, the survival cost I had subsidized for half a decade at the expense of my own dignity and physical health. "And the kids?" I asked, feeling that tiny, inevitable spike in my chest that never entirely faded when it came to innocent blood. "The kids are fine. The school confirmed their tuition is paid in full for the year, thanks to the direct wire transfers from your bank. Hudson is getting huge playing soccer for the school team, and little Sophie is as rowdy as ever. They have crisp new uniforms and all their books." I nodded, taking a sip of tea. I had established a strict, non-negotiable rule regarding my grandkids. I did not allow Fletcher or Lauren to bring them to my house under any circumstances. My home was my sanctuary, my safe space, and their parents' presence would contaminate the air I had fought so hard to purify. Instead, I agreed to see the kids once a month on entirely neutral ground. The Sunday following Marge's visit, I got ready for my monthly meetup. I put on a flawlessly tailored camel wool coat, a silk scarf, and sensible shoes. I drove my own car, a modest model, but with a perfectly maintained engine. I had started driving regularly again to the massive Central City Park, a place packed with families, ancient trees, and ice cream carts. I walked up to the swing set area at exactly 3 p.m., the time agreed upon via text message. I sat on a wooden bench under the shade of a massive oak, holding a large, waxed paper bag stuffed with the kids' favorite candies, a couple of illustrated storybooks, and 2 small wooden artisan toys. 10 minutes later, I saw Fletcher walking up the white gravel path. He was holding Hudson and Sophie by the hands. My son looked like he had aged 5 years in the last 12 months. His posture, once arrogant, upright, and owning the world, was now hunched under the crushing weight of actually providing for a family. He wore a jacket frayed at the elbows and jeans that had seen better days. The haughty tilt of his jaw had vanished, replaced by an expression of perpetual submission and chronic fatigue. The kids spotted me from a distance and bolted, ripping their hands from their father's grip with genuine thrill. "Grandma!" Sophie shrieked, launching herself into my arms with enough force to knock the wind out of me. Hudson arrived a second later, wrapping his arms around my waist and burying his face in my coat. I squeezed them against my chest, feeling the warmth of their little bodies, breathing in the scent of the cheap kids' shampoo they used now. I handed them the bag of candy and the toys and sent them off to play on the wooden jungle gym, warning them with a smile not to run too fast. Fletcher stood in front of me a few feet away, like a beggar waiting for an audience with a queen on a public street. I didn't offer him a seat on my bench. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice flat, raspy, completely drained of vital energy. "You look really good. That coat is new." Rest works miracles, Fletcher. So does not cleaning up the messes of irresponsible adults in my own kitchen. He looked down at his scuffed shoes. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, rubbing the fabric nervously, rocking slightly on his heels. "I wanted to say thank you for the school stuff. The principal sent the notice that the trust covers absolutely everything this year. It's a massive help. Lauren and I, well, we're going through a pretty rough patch. The rent is drowning us. Prices went up, and the car's engine started misfiring. It needs urgent repairs, or I'm going to be walking to work." I raised my right hand, stopping his words dead in the air, with the exact same efficiency a brick wall stops a punch. My face remained stone cold, refusing to show a single drop of the pity he was desperately trying to squeeze out of my mother's heart. "The trust is for the comprehensive education of my grandchildren, Fletcher. It is not a life raft for your past financial blunders, nor a consolation prize for your failure. Whatever you do with your personal expenses, your rent down south or the mechanics of your vehicle, is the exclusive problem of the man of the house. And as you made perfectly clear a year ago, you are the absolute boss of your family." "Mom, please, I'm just asking for a small loan, an advance. I'll pay you back in full the second I get my end-of-year bonus at the office. I swear on my life. We're sleeping in an apartment that smells like damp mold every time it rains." I looked at him with the clinical coldness of a camera lens adjusting focus on a pathetic subject in a bleak landscape. "Smells like damp mold. What a shame. I suppose you'll have to buy a decent air freshener at the supermarket. Or perhaps Lauren can bring home more free perfume samples from the mall counter to mask the smell on the walls." Fletcher closed his eyes, absorbing the direct hit of my total awareness of his housing and employment situation. All color drained completely from his face. He realized in that split second of public humiliation in the park that I knew exactly where they were, exactly what they did, and exactly how far they had fallen. He realized that my intelligence network was vastly superior to any app he could ever swipe on his phone. "There are no loans, Fletcher. There are no extensions on blocked cards. There are no emergency wire transfers. I gave you my house, my life savings, and my unconditional service for 5 years. And you repaid me by plotting my confinement in a nursing home and ordering me to scrub the floors while you jetted off on a luxury vacation with my money. The empathy faucet is shut off permanently. Enjoy the independent life you built with your own 2 hands." I didn't wait for his reply. I stood up from the wooden bench, adjusted the belt of my coat, and walked toward the sandbox. I spent the next hour pushing Sophie on the highest swing, listening to Hudson tell me about his school science projects and laughing with them under the warm afternoon sun. Fletcher sat alone on a distant bench, watching us in total silence, reduced to the role of a miserable, helpless spectator in the life of a family he himself had destroyed through sheer greed and arrogance. When our scheduled time was up, I kissed my grandkids' sweaty foreheads. I promised to see them next month at the exact same time, and I walked to my car parked on the avenue without looking back. There were no goodbyes for my son. My silence was the only language he deserved to hear from me for the rest of his life. I drove back to my quiet street. The sunset was beginning to paint the sky in brilliant shades of purple and orange. I parked in the driveway, pulled out my high-security keys, and unlocked the front door. The metallic clack of the deadbolt, the exact sound that triggered my liberation a year ago, welcomed me in. The house greeted me with the smell of waxed wood, fresh flowers, and absolute peace. I hung my coat on the entryway rack and walked straight down the back hallway. I opened the heavy dark wood door to my darkroom. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me, sinking into the comforting darkness of isolation. I flipped on the red safety light. The room bathed in that familiar, ancient scarlet glow. I had spent the morning shooting photos in the garden, and I needed to develop a roll of black and white film. I prepped the plastic trays with the chemicals, the developer, the stop bath, and the fixer. The sharp metallic scent filled my lungs, an aroma that others found deeply unpleasant or outdated, but which to me was the perfume of my independence. The smell of the honest labor that raised and paid for the very walls surrounding me. I pulled the negative from the metal spiral of the developing tank. I carefully cut it into strips with sharp scissors and placed it into the enlarger's negative carrier. I adjusted the lens focus over the blank photographic paper, calculating the exposure time with the precision of someone who has done this thousands of times in the dark. Exactly 15 seconds of projected light. I picked up the exposed photo paper with bamboo tongs and submerged it in the first tray. The developing liquid completely covered the white surface. I leaned over the vat, watching under the dim red light as the usual chemical magic did its work. Slowly, the shapes began to emerge from nothingness onto the paper. First the densest shadows, then the midtones, and finally the sharp, hard, crystal-clear details. It wasn't a portrait of a stranger's family smiling falsely for a Christmas card. It wasn't an image of an ungrateful son or a haughty daughter-in-law. It was a flawless photograph of the facade of my own house, the solid wood front door firmly shut, the porch clean and completely cleared under the morning sun, the rose bushes blooming in the bottom corners of the frame, strong and deeply rooted in the soil I watered myself every single morning. An impenetrable fortress that belonged solely and exclusively to me. I moved the paper to the stop bath to instantly halt the chemical reaction, then submerged it in the fixer. The image became permanent, unalterable, immune to the passage of time and the lies of others. I grabbed the wet photograph by the corner with the tongs and hung it on the drying line strung across the room, securing it with a small wooden peg. The water dripped slowly from the bottom edge of the paper onto the tile floor, marking the seconds with a soft, rhythmic, minuscule sound in the middle of the perfect silence. Plip, plip. I stood there in the scarlet quiet of my sanctuary, looking at the sharp image of my finished home. I had cleaned the house exactly as I was ordered to, and in doing so I had swept away every last particle of my former submission. I turned off the red light. The darkness was absolute, but I knew the way out by heart. Please note that the story presented here is created solely for educational and reflective purposes, to inspire positive life changes. The story we just shared resonates deeply because it touches the very core of family dynamics, lifelong sacrifice, and the often blurred line between unconditional love and enabling exploitation. Hearing how a mother's lifetime of devotion was met with entitlement rather than gratitude serves as a powerful emotional wake-up call for all of us. The most profound lesson we can draw and apply to our daily lives is that establishing healthy boundaries is not a lack of love, but a fundamental act of self-respect. We often believe that sacrificing our own well-being will naturally breed appreciation, but without mutual respect, it only breeds a toxic sense of entitlement. To build a better, more fulfilling life, we must learn to actively evaluate the relationships around us and ensure that our kindness is not being weaponized against us. True family and genuine love require reciprocity, compassion, and honoring the dignity of every individual, regardless of their age or utility. We should apply this by communicating openly, setting limits gracefully but firmly, and teaching our children the value of hard work and gratitude through demonstrating our own self-worth. This narrative invites us to look deeply at our own dinner tables, to ask if we are fostering genuine appreciation or quietly cultivating resentment. By doing so, we create environments where people are valued for who they are, not just for what they can provide financially or practically. Ultimately, true empowerment comes from knowing when to shift our emotional focus and develop the authentic picture of our lives, ensuring that we never lose our own identity while caring for the people we love. Listening to this narrative, I am profoundly moved by the silent struggles that many older generations endure in the name of family preservation. It breaks my heart to see how easily the purity of a parent's sacrifice can be twisted into a rite of convenience by those who simply forget to be grateful. Yet within this heartbreak, there is an incredibly inspiring spark of human resilience and the reawakening of self-worth. I believe that aging should never equate to becoming invisible or losing the right to command respect within one's own home. This story beautifully illustrates that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity and rewrite the ending of your own narrative. In my view, the truest form of human connection is built on mutual empathy, where neither person has to completely erase themselves to keep the other comfortable. We live in a fast-paced world that often values youth and material convenience over wisdom and foundational loyalty, which is a tragic misplacement of values. By watching the main character shift her lens, I am reminded that our boundaries actually teach people how to love us properly. It is a harsh but necessary truth that sometimes we must stop cushioning the fall so that others can finally learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. I feel that true humanism lies in empowering others through accountability, rather than crippling them through endless, unappreciated charity. We must consciously choose to nurture relationships that celebrate our presence, rather than those that only tolerate us for what we can financially provide. A peaceful life is not one without conflict, but one where your inner sanctuary remains undefiled by those who refuse to honor it. I hope this tale encourages anyone who feels taken for granted to find the courage to turn the key on their own emotional and physical well-being. Let us all strive to be the kind of people who notice the invisible labor of our loved ones and say thank you before the breaking point is reached. Ultimately, the most beautiful photograph we can ever develop is a life lived with authentic self-respect, unwavering truth, and a heart that knows its own immeasurable value. Disclaimer: the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this commentary are personal reflections, intended strictly for inspirational, humanistic, and educational purposes. This content does not constitute professional, psychological, financial, or legal advice. Listeners should apply these reflections to their own lives at their own discretion and seek professional guidance if dealing with complex family or financial disputes. We assume no responsibility or liability for any actions taken based on the interpretation of this story and commentary. Please note that the story presented here is created solely for educational and reflective purposes to inspire positive life changes. The story we just shared resonates deeply because it touches the very core of family dynamics, lifelong sacrifice, and the often blurred line between unconditional love and enabling exploitation. Hearing how a mother's lifetime of devotion was met with entitlement rather than gratitude serves as a powerful emotional wake-up call for all of us. The most profound lesson we can draw and apply to our daily lives is that establishing healthy boundaries is not a lack of love, but a fundamental act of self-respect. We often believe that sacrificing our own well-being will naturally breed appreciation, but without mutual respect, it only breeds a toxic sense of entitlement. To build a better, more fulfilling life, we must learn to actively evaluate the relationships around us and ensure that our kindness is not being weaponized against us. True family and genuine love require reciprocity, compassion, and honoring the dignity of every individual, regardless of their age or utility. We should apply this by communicating openly, setting limits gracefully but firmly, and teaching our children the value of hard work and gratitude through demonstrating our own self-worth. This narrative invites us to look deeply at our own dinner tables, to ask if we are fostering genuine appreciation or quietly cultivating resentment. By doing so, we create environments where people are valued for who they are, not just for what they can provide financially or practically. Ultimately, true empowerment comes from knowing when to shift our emotional focus and develop the authentic picture of our lives, ensuring that we never lose our own identity while caring for the people we love. Listening to this narrative, I am profoundly moved by the silent struggles that many older generations endure in the name of family preservation. It breaks my heart to see how easily the purity of a parent's sacrifice can be twisted into a rite of convenience by those who simply forget to be grateful. Yet within this heartbreak, there is an incredibly inspiring spark of human resilience and the reawakening of self-worth. I believe that aging should never equate to becoming invisible or losing the right to command respect within one's own home. This story beautifully illustrates that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity and rewrite the ending of your own narrative. In my view, the truest form of human connection is built on mutual empathy, where neither person has to completely erase themselves to keep the other comfortable. We live in a fast-paced world that often values youth and material convenience over wisdom and foundational loyalty, which is a tragic misplacement of values. By watching the main character shift her lens, I am reminded that our boundaries actually teach people how to love us properly. It is a harsh but necessary truth that sometimes we must stop cushioning the fall so that others can finally learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. I feel that true humanism lies in empowering others through accountability, rather than crippling them through endless, unappreciated charity. We must consciously choose to nurture relationships that celebrate our presence, rather than those that only tolerate us for what we can financially provide. A peaceful life is not one without conflict, but one where your inner sanctuary remains undefiled by those who refuse to honor it. I hope this tale encourages anyone who feels taken for granted to find the courage to turn the key on their own emotional and physical well-being. Let us all strive to be the kind of people who notice the invisible labor of our loved ones and say thank you before the breaking point is reached. Ultimately, the most beautiful photograph we can ever develop is a life lived with authentic self-respect, unwavering truth, and a heart that knows its own immeasurable value. Disclaimer: the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this commentary are personal reflections intended strictly for inspirational, humanistic, and educational purposes. This content does not constitute professional psychological, financial, or legal advice. Listeners should apply these reflections to their own lives at their own discretion and seek professional guidance if dealing with complex family or financial disputes. We assume no responsibility or liability for any actions taken based on the interpretation of this story and commentary.